I've been playing D&D 5th edition for about a year and a half now, and for the past several months I've had an idea for a character build kicking around in my head. For the sake of exercising myself of this obsession more than anything else, I've decided to record this video going step by step through the build. I've taken to calling this build the Grapple Bard, and the basic idea is to combine the College of Swords Bard and the Rune Knight Fighter subclasses to create a melee fighter who combines grappling and spellcasting to debilitate and control single dangerous enemies on the battlefield. I believe that the character I've created here is uniquely good at doing this and allows for a lot of fun out of combat to boot. Before we begin, I will say that I have not had the chance to play this character in actual gameplay, so I can't vouch for its effectiveness, but I don't think I'm crazy here. I'm going to present the build now, and you can decide if you agree. So here we are in D&D Beyond, which I'll be using to construct our Grapple Bard. To note, this build requires Xanathar's Guide to Everything and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, but it doesn't require any other content. We don't need any Critical Role stuff, magic stuff, Eberron stuff, and nothing else. We also do not need to use the optional class features or origin customization options introduced in Tasha's. We will begin by selecting our race, and the race I want for this is the base half-elf. The reason is because this build is very ability score intensive, and having a total of 4 extra points from our race instead of the usual 2 or 3 is a huge boost for us. The +2 charisma is right where we want it. We get 2 additional +1s. Those will go into constitution and strength. We get 2 skill proficiencies as a half-elf. Since this is a character based around grappling, and athletics is the skill that governs grapple checks, we definitely want that proficiency, so we might as well take it now. The other skill proficiency can go where you like. There aren't any others that are essential to the build the way that athletics is, but I will note that there are 4 skills that happen to synergize well with this build. Those skills are animal handling, deception, intimidation, and sleight of hand. I will go ahead and take deception. The bonus language doesn't matter. You can pick what you like, whatever's appropriate for your campaign. I will note that we're going to get giant incidentally later down the line, so don't bother take that. Let's take dwarvish. Why not? We'll set our starting ability scores. The standard array is going to work just fine for our purposes. We're going to put our 15 into strength, our 14 into charisma, and our 13 into constitution. After our racial bonuses, that gives us 16 strength and charisma with +3 modifiers, and 14 constitution with a +2 modifier. These scores are very important to make this build work, and they're the reason that I chose a half-elf. Strength is going to affect our weapon attacks as well as our grapple checks. Charisma is our spellcasting ability, and it's very useful outside of combat. And Constitution affects both our hit points and our saving throws to maintain concentration on spells. As a spellcaster on the front lines of battle, we're going to be taking a lot of hits and making a lot of concentration checks, so 14 Constitution is basically mandatory as far as I'm concerned. The other ability scores do not matter to the build. You can assign them as you like based on your idea for your character, the flavor you want it to have. I'm going to go ahead and put 12 into wisdom, 10 dexterity, and 8 intelligence. I will note at this point that I could achieve this same ability score array. Okay. As I was saying, I will note at this point that I could achieve this same ability score array using the Mountain Dwarf in combination with the new customized origin system from Tasha's, because the Mountain Dwarf gets 2 strength and 2 constitution, total of 4 extra points. If I can flip those around and use a point buy, I could get this same ability score array using that, but I chose to use the half-elf here because that allows me to get these scores using a standard array, which makes it more widely applicable in case you can't use the custom origins or point-buy system. And also beyond that, I just like I like elves. I like elves better than dwarves. I also do like the extra skill proficiencies as well from half-elf. Alright, now we will select our class, and we will be taking our first level in fighter rather than bard. The reason is I've been playing around with this build for months, and in all that experimentation, I was never able to get around the fact that this build just needs to wear heavy armor. If we don't, our low dexterity means that our armor class just isn't where it needs to be for a frontline fighter, especially at low levels. Another nice perk, though, of starting as a fighter is that we get proficiency with Constitution saving throws, which we will be making a lot to maintain concentration on our spells. Getting this proficiency off the bat at level 1 means we don't need to worry about improving our concentration later by taking Warcaster or something like that. Our ability score improvements can go straight into actually improving our ability scores. We get 2 more skill proficiencies as a fighter. I will put those into Insight and Perception. This fits well with my conception of this character as a samurai type warrior, constantly maintaining awareness of his surroundings. But you can take whatever you like with these, keeping in mind what I said about the skills that synergize well with this build. We also get a fighting style at level 1. We're going to exclusively be using one-handed weapons with this build, so I want the dueling fighting style eventually, but we're going to get that when we get to become a swords bard, so I don't need to take it right now. What I'll take instead is the blind fighting style introduced in Tasha's, which gives us 10 feet of blind sight. With this, we can effectively see anything within 10 feet that isn't behind total cover or hidden from us, even if we're blinded or in the dark. Not only does this fit well with the vigilant warrior archetype I was just talking about, but it also synergizes very well with a couple of the spells I'm going to take later on. We also get second wind at first level as a fighter. A little bit of healing once per short rest as a bonus action. It's not terribly consequential, but I'll certainly take it. For our background, the one that I'm going to take here is the mercenary veteran. I picture this character as someone who's a seasoned warrior, used to navigating negotiations and other tricky social situations, and someone who fights for his personal interests rather than any larger cause. We get proficiency with the persuasion skill, and another of our choice. I'll take intimidation. That's one of the skills that synergizes nicely with this build, and it feels appropriate for the character. We also get land vehicles and a gaming set. Oh, for fuck's sake. That's the last time I'm gonna leave that in if it keeps happening. Twice it's a funny joke, but 3 times it just wears out its welcome. Not a good bit. Alright, as I was saying, we get proficiency with land vehicles, as well as a gaming set of our choice. Playing cards makes sense for someone who's good at reading and deceiving others, so that's what I'm going to take. And lastly, at level 1, we will sort out our starting equipment. I'll use the standard choices. As I said before, heavy armor is basically mandatory for this build, so I will of course take the chainmail. I'm going to take actually a martial weapon and a shield. I'll take a longsword here. Eventually, we're going to use our offhand for grappling, and we're going to need to get rid of the shield. But we aren't ready to take full advantage of that yet, so at these early levels, we might as well equip a shield and boost our armor class a little bit. And to finish off, I will take the 2 hand axes as a ranged attack option. I'll take an explorer's pack, and I will take our playing card set that we're proficient with. Alright, now let's come back and get to level 2 before we start talking about tactics. At level 2, we are going to multiclass into Bard, and we're going to be sticking with Bard for our next 6 levels. We gain proficiency with an instrument of our choice. It doesn't matter in the slightest. Take whatever you like. I will choose the viol because, for whatever reason, I like the idea of this guy playing a fiddle, and this is the closest thing on D&D Beyond. Again, doesn't matter, choose what you like. We get another skill proficiency, and the one I am going to take here is actually investigation, and this is going to be shoring up a weakness of ours. Investigation is the most widely applicable and, in my experience, the most common intelligence skill check that DMs call for. And this is going to make up for our low intelligence stat in that regard. I like the idea as well that my character isn't a learned man. He doesn't care about academic topics like history or religion, but over time he has learned to be disciplined when investigating his surroundings as a matter of self-interest. We also here get Bardic Inspiration. Eventually that's going to be powering our blade flourishes and boosting our armor class in combat, but for now it's just a nice buff to provide to allies. But the big thing here, of course, is that we get spellcasting at this level. We get 2 cantrips. I'm not going to worry about taking an attacking cantrip. If I'm not able to hit somebody with a sword in combat, I'll just throw a hand axe at range or find something else useful to do. Instead, I'll take 2 utility cantrips that give me fun things to do outside of combat. For my purposes, I'm going to go with Friends and Minor Illusion, but there's a lot of good options here. Things like Mage Hand, Mending, Message, Prestidigitation. Take whatever you like. And another nice thing about choosing Half-Elf is we have our Dark Visions and as well as our Blind Vision, so we don't have to worry about Dancing Lights or Light for a light-producing cantrip. We also learn 4 first-level spells, but let's keep in mind we only have 2 spell slots right now to work with. We're going to take that into account when making our selections. The first spell I definitely want is Healing Word, so that if somebody goes down in combat, we can bring them back up as a bonus action at range while still having our action available for a weapon attack or something else. I do want another spell to take with me into combat, and the spell I'm going to choose for that is Fairy Fire. Fairy Fire is a perfect low-level spell for this character. It has a fairly large area of effect. It makes us more effective as a melee fighter by granting advantage to our attacks. It takes advantage of our reliable concentration, and the fact that it only requires a verbal component to cast means that we can keep our hands full with a sword and shield without any issues. That same thing is true of Healing Word, by the way. The next spell I'm going to take is Disguise Self. Disguise Self is a very fun spell which we'll be able to make use of throughout the life of this character. Importantly at this level though, if we're casting Disguise Self, there's a good chance it's because we want to avoid getting into a fight. This means that in a given situation, we either want to use our spell slots on Disguise Self, or we want to spend them on Fairy Fire and Healing Word. But there isn't really a conflict between the two, which helps us manage our low number of spell slots. We get one more spell here, and I'm going to use that for a ritual that we can cast without expending a spell slot. If nobody in the party already has Detect Magic, I'll take that, but there are several other good choices here, things like Comprehend Languages or Unseen Servant. So, at this point, let's take a look at our character sheet and let's talk a little about low-level tactics. If we're in a dungeon crawl or another combat-heavy scenario, I'm going to be walking around in chainmail with my sword and my shield, and that's going to give me a solid armor class, lets me wade into melee combat. I'll hold on to my spell slots for as long as possible, ideally for one big final fight. When that fight comes, I'll cast Fairy Fire on my first turn, and then save my other spell slot for Healing Word in case somebody gets knocked unconscious. I do not want to be using it otherwise. That's the main tactic for this character in combat scenarios. Outside of combat, between my other spells and my collection of skill proficiencies, I can get up to a lot of fun there as well. Now, let's advance our character a little more. I'm going to gloss over level 3 and go right to level 4, which gets us to our 3rd level in Bard. And this is where the build becomes really effective, and this is where we get to start grappling. At Bard level 2, I get Jack of all trades, which buffs my ability checks I'm not proficient in, and I get Song of Rest, which makes my party's short rests a little bit better. Those are both nice, but they don't affect the build. At level 3, we get to choose a Bard subclass, and the one we want is the College of Swords. College of Swords gives us several unique perks that the other martially focused Bard subclass, the College of Valor, does not. First, we get a fighting style. We will take the dueling fighting style, which adds +2 to damage with the one-handed weapons I am using exclusively with this build. We also get to use our weapon as a spell focus, which is important because it means that I can use my sword hand for both casting spells and attacking while leaving my offhand free for grappling. This is a unique benefit of being a swords bard. The only other way in the game to get this is either to get your hands on certain magic items or be a Pact of the Blade Warlock with the improved Pact weapon invocation. We also get blade flourishes as a swords bard. When we hit with a weapon attack, we can use a Bardic Inspiration die to do some extra damage, raise our movement speed by 10 feet for the turn, and get another perk based on which flourish we use. We've got 3 options. You can completely forget about the slashing and mobile flourishes. They're not that great in most situations, and we don't need them. The only one we care about here is Defensive Flourish, which gives us an AC boost until our next turn. This is great, and we are going to begin using our Bardic Inspiration on Defensive Flourishes the vast majority of the time. We also, as a level 3 Bard, get expertise in 2 of our skills, one of which is immediately going to go into the athletics skill that powers our grapple checks. I now have a +7 bonus to these checks, and it's only going to get better from there. When I try to grapple someone, I can be confident that I'm going to succeed consistently, and this will remain true throughout the career of this character. The other expertise can go wherever you like, based on your character and what you want to do with it. Just keep in mind what I said about the skills that synergize best with this build. I'm going to go with Deception, personally. I like the idea of my character being able to keep his thoughts hidden and leave his enemies guessing about what his next move is going to be. As a 3rd level Bard, we now have access to 2nd level spells, and there are 2 2nd level spells here I want very badly. This is why I gloss over level 3. Whatever spell you take there should immediately get swapped out now so that you can take both of these spells, which can each of them potentially partner with grappling to great effect. The first spell that I want is Heat Metal. If I'm going up against a big bad guy wielding a metal weapon, I'm casting Heat Metal on that weapon as soon as combat starts. The big bad guy takes 2d8 fire damage automatically and has to make a Constitution save or be forced to drop the weapon. If they succeed initially, that's perfectly fine, because as long as I maintain concentration, I can use a bonus action on later turns to repeat the process. Once they've dropped their weapon, either voluntarily or because they failed their saving throw, I then have my action available to grapple them. Once they're disarmed and grappled, I can then drag them away from the weapon they just dropped at half speed and prevent them from picking it back up. At that point, they'd better have another weapon on them, because otherwise they are a sitting duck. The other 2nd level spell I want to take is Silence. Silence targets a 20-foot sphere and it prevents any spells with verbal components from being cast within its area. Now, here's a fun fact. Of the over 500 spells in D&D 5th edition, about 94% of them require verbal components. Here's another fun fact. Of those non-verbal spells, there is exactly one that allows the caster to teleport. That is the funky, relatively rare ranger/wizard spell, Steel Wind Strike. This means that if we grapple a spellcaster within an area of silence, they are extremely constrained in what they can do. If they don't happen to have Steel Wind Strike or a non-spell source of teleportation, they're stuck either trying to break our grapple or our concentration on silence. And if they can't do either of those things, they are a sitting duck that can only look on in silent horror as we wail on them with our longsword. I do want to be clear here that this is not an automatic win button to use against spellcasters. First of all, it takes 2 actions to set up the grapple and then cast a spell. Eventually, we're going to be remedying that problem, but for now, it does mean that our target is going to have time to react to what we're doing. Second, there are a couple of dangerous spells in the game that can be cast without verbal components. One of them is the very dangerous and quite common 3rd level spell, Hypnotic Pattern. So our spellcasters are potentially going to have certain spells at their disposal that they can use against us. And of course, there's always the possibility that we're going to be counterspelled when we try to cast this silence in the first place. But with all that said, if you're in the right situation and you play your cards right, this is a potentially very powerful combination. Let's take this build to level 5 now by taking a 4th level in Bard. We get here our first ability score increase, which I am going to use to increase our strength to 18. We're just starting to make great use of our ability to grapple opponents, so let's make sure we're able to hit those grapples as consistently as possible. This also, of course, makes our sword attacks better. We are also, at this level, going to get another cantrip. There's a lot of nice utility cantrips here. Take whatever suits you. I like Mage Hand. I'll go with Mage Hand. We also get to learn another spell. Now, in terms of spells that synergize well with grappling, we've already taken the most effective options available to us. The only other option that fit in at all that I could find is Cloud of Daggers. If you get somebody grappled within the area of this Cloud of Daggers, they automatically take 44 slashing damage on each of their turns without a saving throw. And that's all well and good, but I don't think it's enough to justify a spell selection. Remember that our goal here isn't to use grapples to do the most damage possible. If that was the case, I'd be doing a different build with probably a paladin or a barbarian. Our goal with this character is to use grapples to control and debilitate enemies. A 5-foot cube area of effect damage spell just doesn't accomplish that. Instead, I would rather take a spell here that's going to be useful in other scenarios, not necessarily just grappling. Things like invisibility and suggestion are on the Bard spell list. Those are great options. But I'm going to put in a special word here for pyrotechnics. If there's a small open flame around us, such as a torch being held by a patrolling guard or a brazier in an enemy's lair, we can use pyrotechnics to create a good-sized area of heavy smoke. Now remember that we took the blind fighting style earlier on, so we can use that to navigate around or fight within the smoke cloud just fine, while our enemies are effectively blinded. I mean, hell, if you really wanted to, you could even use the fireworks option from pyrotechnics, even if you're in the area of effect, and just not worry about failing your constitution save. You've got blindside, you can still see, it's not a big problem. Pyrotechnics is, I think, a very fun spell generally. I'm always looking for excuses to take this spell, and our blind sight bard is the perfect excuse. Let's move up 2 levels now to level 7. That's going to get us to bard level 6, and that's going to finish what we want with bard for the time being. At bard level 5, we get font of inspiration, which means our bardic inspirations now come back on a short rest instead of a long rest. For us, that mostly means more opportunities to use defensive flourish, which is very nice. At bard level 6, we get extra attack, which is something you want with any martially focused character, including ours. This is coming online 1 or 2 levels later than it normally would for a martial character, but we haven't put it off too long, and I think it's fair to say that what we're getting in return for putting it off makes up for it. And remember as well that a grapple attempt replaces an attack when you take the attack action. So now when we take the attack action on our turn, we're using one of those to make a grapple, and then that gives us another sword attack as well to make as part of the same action. We also now have access to level 3 spells, including the 2 best spells for this build, which will make us now extremely effective at controlling individual opponents on the battlefield when we combine them with our grapples. Those spells are Fear and Stinking Cloud. First, let's look at Fear. Fear targets creatures in a 30-foot cone with wisdom saves. On a failure, they are frightened of us, which means they cannot willingly move closer to us, and their attacks and ability checks have disadvantage while they can see us. This spell's version of Fear further stipulates that they must use their action to dash and get as far away from us as possible, and, crucially, they don't get the opportunity to make another saving throw to end the fright unless they end their turn out of our line of sight. Now, imagine for a moment that we're going up against a big, scary creature that relies on making attacks to deal damage. What happens if we hit that creature with Fear and then grapple them? The answer is, to put it simply, they are screwed. They cannot repeat their save unless they get away from us, which they can't do because they're grappled and their speed is 0. So, they're either stuck using their action to grapple, to break the grapple rather, or to make attacks against us and try to break our concentration. And either of those things they are doing with disadvantage. We're probably throwing on defensive flourishes with our extra attack to boost our AC even more. We're never going to get hit. We're never going to have that concentration broken. We're never going to have that grapple broken. If you get this set up, this is a potentially combat-ending combination. But that's not going to be effective in all scenarios. If we're going up against something that doesn't rely on attack rolls, but instead maybe has like a breath weapon or something else that relies on saving throws, Fear isn't going to be as effective. That enemy is still going to have a reliable way to deal damage to us and possibly break our concentration. And that is where Stinking Cloud comes in. If I don't think Fear is going to be a good option, I'm instead going to cast Stinking Cloud positioned such that our grappled target is just inside the cloud and we're just outside it. Stinking Cloud creates an area of heavy obscurement, and creatures within that area have to start their turns by making a Constitution saving throw against poison or lose their action for the turn. Now, the first thing to say about this is that a Constitution saving throw against poison is just about the easiest save in the game for monsters to make, so I'm not going to be relying on this to work consistently. But, that said, it will work sometimes, and when it does, it'll be utterly debilitating. Suddenly, our victim can't move or act on their turn. That's not all, though. Because they're in a heavy, obscured area, they can't see us, but we can see them with our blind sight. That means as long as we keep the cloud up, with them just inside and us just outside, we have advantage on attacks against them, and we get to just swing away. So, at this point at level 7, we now have a selection of 4 excellent spells that combine with our grapples to control and debilitate enemies. They cover a wide range of different situations. They target several different kinds of saving throws. One of them, Silence, doesn't even require a saving throw at all. It just works. Now that we have all these spells at our disposal, we're going to now be done with Bard for a couple levels. We're going to go back into Fighter in order to allow us to make the best use possible of these great spells we've picked up. One last thing I will note before we move on, though, is that Leomund's Tiny Hut is on the level 3 Bard spell list. This is an extremely useful ritual spell, and if nobody else in the party has access to it, I would recommend at this point either trade out Fairy Fire or your first level ritual spell you took in order to get Leomund's Tiny Hut. It is very much worth it. Now that we have extra attack and our spell selection is where we want it, let's go back into Fighter for our next 2 levels. At Fighter level 2, overall level 8, we get Action Surge. Action Surge is huge for us, and this is what really completes the core of our build. With it, we can now set up both our controlling spell and our grapple on the same turn. Before this point, there would always be that turn in between the two where our target had the chance to react to what we're doing. We are now closing that opportunity to them. At Fighter level 3, overall level 9, we get to choose a fighter subclass. And the one I want here, without a question, is the Rune Knight. Rune Knight pairs so absurdly well with this build that I almost half suspect it was intentionally designed to do so. So, first here we have proficiency with Smith's Tools in the Giant language. You can see why I said earlier not to choose it. That's nice. Not what we're here for, though. What we are here for are the runes. We get to learn 2 runes, which we carve into our weapons or armor or what have you, and we get benefits from them that are just on all the time. Each rune gives us a passive benefit and some sort of ability we get to activate once per short rest. The 2 runes I want are the Cloud Rune and the Frost Rune. Between the 2 of these, we get advantage on animal handling, deception, intimidation, and sleight of hand checks, thanks to the passive benefits they get. So now you can see why I cited these 4 specifically as being particularly synergetic with our build. Our real reason for taking these runes, though, is for their other benefits, which we can activate each once per short rest. The Cloud Rune lets us use a reaction when we or an ally within 30 feet of us gets hit with an attack, and we transfer that attack roll to a different creature. No saving throw, it just works. If somebody on our side is about to get knocked to 0 hit points or take a crit, we can now just completely negate it. Instead, we can make that enemy hit a different enemy, or we can make him hit a tanky ally of ours who's better equipped to take the damage, something like maybe a Raging Barbarian. The Frost Rune gives us a bonus action that we can use for 10 minutes to add a +2 to our ability checks and saving throws that we make using Strength and Constitution. This is practically tailor-made for us. This is going to affect both the Strength Athletics checks that we make to start and maintain grapples, and it affects the Constitution saving throws that we make to maintain concentration on our spells. we could not have asked for a better benefit to give to our martial spellcaster who also does grapples. And, if that was everything we got from Rune Knight, I would be happy. I would take this. Early versions of this build went with Eldritch Knight, but, even if this was all we got from Rune Knight, I think this would be the better choice. But guess what? It's not. Also, at this level, we get Giant's Might, which lets us use a bonus action to grow too large in size and get advantage on strength checks and saving throws for 1 minute. If you look at the grapple rules, you'll know that you can only grapple creatures if they are no more than one size bigger than you. We're a medium creature, so that normally limits us to large size creatures. Now, we are not only getting advantage on those athletics checks we're making for our grapples, we now also can grapple creatures up to huge in size. And this is right around the level where we might start seeing a lot of huge creatures. Hell, if it's a really tough fight, we can even stack this with our Frost Rune and get an additional +2 on those grapple rolls that we're making with advantage. The other nice thing too is that because like a lot of the stuff in Tasha's, our Giant's Might is based on our proficiency bonus. When this comes online, we're getting it 4 times per long rest, and that's going to scale more in the future, even though we're not going to continue with this class. All in all, the benefits we are getting from these 3 levels of Rune Knight aren't just good, they are specifically excellent for this build in a way that completely pushes it to the next level, and it more than justifies some of the awkwardness we had earlier on with our multiclassing. Once you get to this point, I think this build is excellent. This is where I'm going to end this build video, because this is the point where all of the core mechanics have come into place. At this point, I want to end by doing a bit of a recap. At level 9, we have a +12 modifier to athletics checks that we make to make and maintain grapples. With Giant's Might, we can give ourselves advantage on those checks, plus grow in size so that we can grapple huge creatures. We have a good variety of spells we can use in combination with our grapples, and thanks to Action Surge, we can now set up both the grapple and the spell on the same turn. With our Frost Rune and our proficiency in Constitution saves, we can reliably maintain concentration on these key spells even though we're in the thick of melee combat. We have a perfectly good armor class. This is still with the chainmail and shield, but by this point we've probably switched it out for plate mail, so this 18 is probably accurate. And remember that we have our defensive flourishes, so we are going to be able to boost that AC even higher. Now, in terms of where to go from here, if I'm in a campaign where I know we're not going all the way to level 20, I would be tempted to, at this point, take one more level in Fighter in order to get an extra ability score increase. Ability score increases are one of the things that are put pretty far behind by this build. It is a weakness of doing this multiclassing. With my ability score increases, I would focus on maxing out my strength and my charisma over taking any feats. We've got so many great things we can do with our spells and with our grappling. We want to really focus on that. I don't want to take more than one level of Fighter with this build. The extra attack from Fighter level 5 is just completely wasted, and while the other perks we can get from going further with Rune Knight are nice, none of them are going to be as game-changing as what we've already gotten. Instead, I would take the rest of our levels in Swords Bard, progress our spellcasting, and if I thought I was in a campaign that might go all the way to level 20, I would skip that 4th level of Fighter, just go all the way with Swords Bard, so that in the end you end up with 17 levels of Bard, and you get access to 9th level spells. The last thing I want to talk about before ending this video is Magical Secrets, the special ability bards get that lets them choose spells from any class at level 10. And again later on, but I'm going to just focus on the level 10. In terms of spells that synergize well with our grappling build, I think we've already actually gotten the best choices. They just happen to naturally be on the bard spell list at low levels. But there are some concentration-based area of effect spells that I think could work well with this build. Some of those spells are Sickening Radiance. We can use that to deal area of effect damage round after round, potentially make them take some levels of exhaustion. Spirit Guardians from the Cleric list is another good choice. Consistent damage round after round that also halves the enemy's movement speed. Storm Sphere is another good choice. Creates difficult terrain. We can keep them inside the area of the Storm Sphere and make spell attacks against the target round after round with our bonus action, and those spell attacks extra have advantage to them. That said, though, I wouldn't be tempted to do these sorts of spells with our Magical Secrets as a first option. I would instead be tempted to use this opportunity to take some high-level Paladin and Ranger spells that you don't get to see a lot because they're 5th level spells. Paladins and Rangers need to be level 17 to get them. But we can get them earlier. We can make use of them earlier. We can get more out of them. The spells that I'm thinking about here are Banishing Smite on the one hand, and then, remember this from earlier, Steel Windstrike. These are really cool spells that work really well for any martial spellcaster, which we are. Just something to think about. All right, I've said my piece. I am going to end this video here. I will put a link to this 9th level character sheet in the description below. I'll also include a document that just has the level by level choices and a text file just as a quick reference in case anyone wants to make this build or something like it. Thank you all for watching. You can follow me on Twitter at YouWon'tBeLaughin'. Link to that also below. I don't have any particular plans to make any more videos. This really was just for the sake of releasing this build into the world so that it can stop taking up so much real estate in my head. But hopefully you all got something out of it. Let me know in the comments below if you have any feedback. Thanks, and I will see you later.